It is a beautiful, overcast, mild May the 5th, 2021. It's a Wednesday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and this one has been on my list for a long time. You've probably heard me mention it a bunch of times. But I had to keep driving past it because things kept coming up and I kept running things too close to the deadline. Finally got some time to do it. This is a museum dedicated to the Confederate prisoner of war camp in the Civil War out here in Andersonville, Georgia, South Georgia. On the sign, they're calling it the National Prisoner of War Museum. But yes, this was the site where in the Civil War, the Union prisoners of war were kept here. Closes up at 5 o'clock, so I've only got 3 hours. Let's go in there and learn what we can. Donning the mask, because they're required. Well, after taking a walk through here, I know now why this is called the National Prisoner of War Museum, because really it's just this main hallway that's dedicated to the Civil War prisoner of war camp, whereas all the adjoining hallways and other rooms are dedicated to World War II and Korean War and Vietnam. And anytime that there was an American prisoner of war, they've got something dedicated to it. It's very extensive. You could spend hours out here reading plaques and learning tons. But let's start with the Civil War, of course. That's kind of what I'm here for. Realistically, I don't have enough time to show everything else, but I will do a walkthrough. This first picture is really of the end of the Civil War, just kind of this ceremonial meeting of the two sides, shaking hands again after the 620,000 deaths that saw the end of the division and the coming back together. Now there was a prisoner of war exchange program, and that's where the North would say something like, we'll give you these prisoners if you give us those prisoners. There was an exchange that happened, and these three Confederate soldiers here had just been captured, but you can see by their posture, they don't seem very worried because they believed that they would be released because of the prisoner exchange program. But when this picture was taken, they didn't totally realize that in July of 1863, that the prisoner exchange program had broken down, and they weren't honoring it anymore. And so, like as not, they went to a Union prisoner of war camp and suffered quite a bit. This drawing, or perhaps etching here, is probably the best depiction of Camp Sumpter ever created. You can see how stuffed together all the prisoners were, trying to make themselves as comfortable as they could, being butts to nuts in there. You can imagine being this close to each other. Where would you use the bathroom? And that itself would pile up very quickly and become very rancid. But this place was here for years. There's all the guard towers. Every few feet there was another guard tower. This is their one river for drinking water. Right here. And along the sides of this drawing are other depictions that people witnessed and then illustrated, well, this artist illustrated as things that happened. and they are coded with numbers. So you look at that number, and you can come down here to the key. So that number 13 was railroad with train of prisoners. Okay, that's not it. Let me look at that again. 13, that's definitely not a railroad. Let's look over here. It would be this 13 over here. Who has this? Distributing rations. Distributing rations. Who will have this? That's the question. Okay, number 15. That's distributing of rations. Number 15. Who will have this? They look like little rocks. Like little hardtack biscuits or something there. That was their rations. You can see why they were so skinny. Look at a few more. Just bringing out the dead and putting them into the mass graves. They didn't even bother to dig individual graves anymore. This big trench and just laid them side by side in the trench. Right there. Oh, and right here. That's where a flood actually washed part of the fence out. So that would have been right there. So a flood came through and washed that out. The prisoners are not leaving. They are saving the planks to build fires with, and probably tables and chairs, or to maybe strengthen their tents with. And they're not trying to leave because there's so many guards and troops right outside the walls there. And then they wouldn't get very far. They would not get very far, but hey, wood. Wood that we could do something with. Let's grab that. More ground towers. Andersonville Prison. Camp Sumpter. So the big letters are Andersonville Prison. That's probably what it was more commonly known as, rather than Camp Sumpter. Named after Fort Sumpter in Charleston. The technology to take pictures in the 1860s was there. It was primitive. But there certainly was lots of pictures taken. So you can see from this one that those illustrations were not exaggerated. And it really does look like Auschwitz. The starvation and misery. It's hard to imagine like something like this ever happened on American soil, but there you go, it did. During those 4 miserable years of the Civil War, this was certainly not the only prisoner of war camp, prison, established in the United States. It's one of many. You can see there's one, a few in Texas, Alabama, South Carolina. This is the one that we're at right now, Camp Sumpter in Andersonville. There's also one in Macon, Millen, Georgia. And that's just the South. The Unions had their own prisoners of war, prisoner of war camps. They weren't quite as primitive, but they had their own. There's a few in New York, Indiana, Illinois. I plan on visiting some of those Union prisoner of war camps if they have a way you can walk around and look at them at some point. Okay, so before I go outside and walk the actual grounds where this happened, I would like to go ahead and do a quick little walkthrough of these adjoining rooms and hallways that have displays for the other wars where Americans were held as prisoner of war. I can't really stop and linger too much because that would make this video way too long, but I feel like you guys would like to see it anyway, so let's do it. Got a flight suit from prisoner of war in World War II.
Trying to stand me up, I thought, well, I guess I'm not dead after all.
Well, this right here is very impactful. It's got rifles from different wars, and they're all coming out of this wall and pointing directly at you as you stand in the middle and watch the videos of personal accounts of being captured. And you're standing here with this mock rubble and rebar and all these rifles pointed at you. The sounds coming from different directions. Yeah, that's it's an experience you would have to be here to experience. Stay in line, don't break rank. Rations here. Okay, so somebody named Sergeant Lonnie B. Ratledge, right here. He was shot down, and eventually, while he was in a prisoner of war camp, cobbled together this crystal radio so that he could listen to the news from scavenged and stolen parts. And this is that actual radio. On this wall over here, it looks like just letters to home from prisoners. You come up to the wall, there's drawers with the actual letters in them. And then, of course, the translation if you're not able to read the handwriting. And then little doors, too. This is a artistically done poem here, or quote. Yeah, it was a quote. Scuttle. The diary of, or scuttle book of Ernest Norquist, kept during his imprisonment in Japanese prisoner of war camp, documented all rumors that came by his way. Apparently he had a lot of time on his hands to make it look that good. This one has a sliding door. I would have kept a sketchbook.
And that was what I needed to know.
It was just an absolutely wonderful reunion. I went from one person to another, hugging and crying and telling them that I'm so good to be home. And I tell you, when I got to where they were, it was a tremendous feeling. I felt I was finally free.
this section, you've got Vietnam. This was what they called tiger cages. And there's a drawing by a prisoner of his view of his cell. His ankles locked into the bottom of the cell. Not enough room to stand up. Even if he could reach the knots and get them undone, wouldn't have been able to leave. Made of poles taken from the mangrove swamps nearby. Some cages were large enough to accommodate 10 or 12 men. Soldier cells used to break the POW's will during the Viet Cong conditioning process were much smaller, just long enough to fit a man laying down, not high enough to let him stand. That would have been one of these. So they weren't just interested in keeping them locked up, they wanted to break their will. Imagine being subjected to that kind of idea. Got a tunneler trying to get out of a prisoner of war camp in World War II. If you've ever seen the movies about the Great Escape, this is what the digging was like. We're, as Americans, part of a legacy. The freedom we enjoy didn't come free. It didn't come free. And this is a sombering experience that to walk through this. For walking through this, you would not imagine that there was people nowadays that are actually fighting and yelling and screaming till they're red in the face about the image on the front of a butter container or the shape of a syrup bottle. If you can actually worry about those kinds of things, you're blessed. These guys wouldn't have imagined who would ever be fighting about that kind of nonsense. Alright, going out of the museum now. I guess I can take my mask off. But here we are. Whew. Okay, the monument at the entrance of the grounds of what used to be the Andersonville prisoner of war camp. It's carved right into brick. Whoever this sculptor was really good. Here we are. This is where it happened. That's where they were. Packed together, trying to survive. No idea how long the fighting would last. There's this really well done drawing that shows the camp at its full capacity with the highest amount of security. Right here you've got 3 fences, all the guard towers, and then cannons outside the 3 fences. They were really worried about the prisoners of war ever getting loose. It seems almost like an overkill. We have here over 24,000 prisoners of war and 1,205 very raw troops with missiles prevailing, badly armed, and worse disciplined to guard them. With the present force, a raid on the post would almost, of necessity, be successful? Wow. This was from a Brigadier General John Henry Winder. That was a quote from him. So even with the 3 fences and all these guard towers, he really had no confidence that if the Union troops tried to raid this prisoner of war camp and release the prisoners, they wouldn't be successful. There it is. No ladder going up it, of course, because they wouldn't want people climbing up there. Attempting to give a little perspective on how tall this was, That's me. I'm guessing at least 20 feet up there. That's how tall these walls were. Because I'm about 6 feet tall, and this is 3 times my height at least. Right at 20 feet. This, yeah, see the green tinting there? It's just made out of telephone poles. Don't know how accurate that is. But it would have been rough-hewn logs. That's an actual photo. And then some weathered representations of just how primitive these tents were. No exaggeration. Quite literally 2 fork poles and then 1 middle pole and a blanket. 4 parts. And that was your home. That was the only bit of ground that you could call your own. I'm sure that blanket did a really good job of keeping the weather off of you down, didn't it? So that's where I was just now. You can see right there the dug-in embattlements. Right there, over there, cannons ready to go. Right outside the fence of the prisoner of war camp. There's no chance of being able to get out of there alive. Even more over here. See some of these monuments. There's tons of them. This one is from Ohio, from the state of Ohio, in memoriam of the 1,055 Ohioan Union soldiers that died here on these grounds at Camp Sumpter. It's one of the really tall ones, like a spire, like the Washington Monument. On the other end it says, "Death before dishonor." And then it's followed by a carving of sun rising over the mountains, looking down upon some, looks like some fresh crops. It's a very positive image to end on with this. But there are tons of other monuments lining this lawn here. And I can't show you every single one. That would just simply take too long. But if you're a history buff, if you like this kind of thing, if it speaks to your soul like it does me, I would encourage you to come out here to Andersonville. It's beautiful. There's Southern hospitality here. That museum I just walked through is completely free and self-guided. But they do have audio tour guides that you can download if you want to do it that way. So now I'm just going to go get in my truck and see if I can find the cemetery. That'll be a good place to end this video out. I am entering the cemetery now. Whoa. This is sombering. They wouldn't even bother to dig individual graves. It was just long trenches where the bodies were laid not even really side by side, kind of overlapping next to each other, buried back up. This prisoner of war camp may not have been the only one in the Civil War on the Confederate side, but it was definitely the most notorious, the most well-known In the course of the war, it imprisoned 45,000, roughly 45,000 Union soldiers. And of those 45,000, right at 13,000 died while in that prison. From starvation, from jaundice, from just in general the ingredients. There was a execution gallows right there. I don't know how often it was in use, but there you go. And here's many of those soldiers, and these gravestones are practically up against each other. That shows you how close they were in the mass grave. They just have the names and their position. Sometimes it has the state where they were from. If they don't know, they just put the USA. And then there's some that just say unknown. This one says unknown. There's another one right over here that says unknown. Unknown, U.S. soldier. And I've seen these gravestones a lot in different Civil War graveyards, and I've never totally understood why the unknown soldiers that are held at the monument in Washington, D.C. are so venerated and guarded around the clock, but yet some other unknown soldiers are just kind of forgotten about. I'm sure there's some kind of symbolism in that whole thing. I just never have totally understood it. Maybe somebody can write that down in the comments. Why are the unknown soldiers guarded around the clock and some are just forgotten about and not? You know, to die for your country and can be completely unknown has got to be the height of selflessness. At least that's my opinion. So I think if you're going to venerate one unknown soldier, you should probably venerate all of them. Anyway, guys, that is going to be it for this one. If, and I'm not going to do the whole thumbs up thing. I'm not even going to monetize this video. It doesn't feel right to. But I'll talk to you down in the comments. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.